And welcome back to 5 Minutes with Scripture. It's been a little bit of a season. We took some time off to enjoy the summer and enjoy the beautiful weather. But now we are going to dive back in. But we're going to do things a little bit differently. Previously we only looked at New Testament and books of the Bible in the New Testament. We're going to go Old Testament for this next one. And we're going to look in the book of Ruth. But there are a lot of things about the book of Ruth that are interesting. And I think it's really easy for us to gloss over. And so I want to today to just kind of give you an overview of why Ruth is important. And I want you to look for some incredible themes that come on. And the first one is God's grace. Now, a lot of times in the Old Testament, we don't exactly think of God as being gracious. And I don't know why that is. I think it's because we look at the time of the Judges as God as a rescuer. We look at Joshua and how God went before Israel as a conqueror. We look at a God that pronounces judgment on his people, but we forget about God's graciousness and is God slow to anger. And when God does finally pronounce, proclaim, fulfill his judgment, they're usually pretty harsh. And the book of Ruth is one of those that is a very interesting and fascinating book. And we're going to start with a little bit of background of where Ruth is and talk about some of these themes, like the theme of grace, the idea of a kinsman redeemer, because this is a very Jesus-like idea and theme. And so we're going to go back a little bit. We're going to go back all the way to just after the Exodus to pick up why the book of Ruth in so many ways covers God's grace. And we're going to start in Numbers chapter 25. Okay, now to set the story, the Exodus has happened, and the Israelites have now left, and they're kind of wandering around for a little bit. And it talks about in Numbers 25, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who sacrificed them to the sacrifice, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. And the people ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. And so we see the rest of Numbers chapter 25 of judgment being pronounced upon the people of Moab. Now, along those same lines, you also had the Amorites that were doing their thing, and they had the whole story of Baal and the donkey and all those things. And so I bring that up because now we're going to go into Deuteronomy chapter 23. And this is why that accounting with Moab was so important. Because in verse 3, it says, "No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation." Basically what that means is at no time can anybody that is from Ammon or Moab become an Israelite. Not even the 10th generation. So it doesn't matter how long things are happening, they will not enter into God's grace, into God's favor. Okay, so we fast forward to the book of Ruth. Now, the book of Ruth is really kind of a weird time in Israel. It takes place during the time of the Judges, as it says in the very first verse of chapter 1. So if you think about the time of the Judges, remember, this is after Joshua has passed away, and this is before King Saul, Israel's first king, shows up. And so at this time, everybody kind of did as they pleased, as it says in the book of Judges. And so this was a time of political chaos where tribes were kind of battling tribes. Different things were going on. It was a time when there was a lot of battle, a lot of war, a lot of blood, a lot of suffering. And so there was a lot of God's judgment that was also being passed according to the scriptures, meaning that Israel would prostrate themselves to another false god, and so as a result of that, they would be placed under judgment and placed under the yoke of another country. And so this is where the book of Ruth comes in. And this is very interesting because Ruth, it already tells us, is from the country of Moab. So here we have this judgment that was pronounced in Deuteronomy chapter 23, that no Moabite may enter into God's people. And yet the book of Ruth starts that they went to go live in the country of Moab. So tomorrow we're going to continue to look at a little bit of a survey of Ruth, and we're going to ask the question, what's in a name? See you then.